Hey, what's happening everyone? Pragmatic Addict here. So, last night I was planning on doing a review of The Boogeyman. That's when I saw the movie, but I'm just gonna get this out there really quick before I start the review, guys. I had a lot to think about after this movie. I needed a lot of decompressing to do. So I feel like this intro doesn't need to be too long. This is a PG-13 Boogeyman horror movie after all. But I do want to state some things that I felt before going into the movie. I had a lot of mixed opinions going into it. So I'm going to start with the things that I was actually kind of excited for and interested and curious about. First off, this is an adaptation of a Stephen King short. Two, like Evil Dead Rise recently, this film was initially planned to just be dumped onto streaming, but because the test screening of this movie was so positive, they decided that they were actually going to put this into theaters. Now, the thing I was most mixed about is, besides the fact that this is a PG-13 horror film called The Boogeyman, this is the third film from director Rob Savage, who has had an interesting layout in my point of view. His first film, Host, was actually being hailed as one of the most critically acclaimed horror films in recent memory. I thought it was fine, but his second film, Dashcam, I hated that film. It was actually one of my least favorite films of 2022. It might have actually been the worst film of the year for me. So, with all that being said, with his next project being a PG-13 Boogeyman horror film that was adapted from a Stephen King short, which is already a very hit and miss thing to me as well, with the overall hype of this being regarded as so much better than expected that it actually got the theater treatment, I really just had no idea what to expect with this movie, and I had to see it right away. Even after seeing it, I just had to have so much time to really figure out how I felt about this movie. So, let's talk about The Boogeyman, guys. So let's start off with the beginning first. This intro is everything that you would expect out of a Boogeyman movie of any level. This intro takes place in this little girl's room. It is just a little girl. It is, taking place at bedtime. I can't remember too well, but I believe that there was, shadows of trees looming into the bedroom. There might have been, rain and thunder and lightning and all that stuff. Just your classic Boogeyman intro. But talking about this intro, one thing that I do want to talk about is how surprising this intro actually was in execution. Now, I feel like, I'm just gonna leave this for you guys to kind of take in your own light, because I know that this is a PG-13 Boogeyman movie, but this intro, and I know that intros are, for movies, are usually what's meant to kind of get the movie into motion, to kind of grab the viewers and keep them, set them aboard for what is going to transpire in the movie. But this intro went down a route that I really was not expecting as far as how far it actually went. So obviously take, what I say as you will, especially with, the circumstances. But I was surprised to see this intro in a PG-13 movie. And it's not that anything is really shown, but just putting the pieces together. Again, for what it was just something that really kind of caught me off surprise, and I thought for an intro, this was actually better than I thought it was going to be. Also, talking about the intro, this might come off as a little bit of a spoiler, but this is literally the first scene, and I actually do need to talk about this to discuss something that I want to talk about later on in this review, and that is actually the character of the Boogeyman in this specific movie. So I didn't remember the 2005 Boogeyman, well, at all, but this Boogeyman, so they give him this trait where he can actually mimic voices. And I know that that is a very cliche and very recycled formula, especially with urban legend, setting and everything. Urban legend creatures and monsters. But I wasn't expecting that. Maybe, again, it's just because going into this movie, I didn't really, take too much into consideration. I was just well, it's a Boogeyman movie. Getting that trait as the Boogeyman, knowing that, okay, so he can do that. Knowing that that's going to be a trait in this movie, with how surprising this intro delivered, I was, pretty set with this movie. I was, really curious to see where it would go. But once we get past this intro and we're actually, getting into the movie. Again, I didn't know what the actual plot of this movie was. I didn't take that into too much consideration, even though I did see the trailers. I didn't expect this to be like a huge story. I didn't expect it to be too complex. I mean, it's a Boogeyman movie. But basically, the daughter of a therapist played by Chris Messina, and I'm just gonna say, this is one of those cases where Chris Messina is obviously the bigger name actor in this movie, and he is in a lot of the trailers, which, I'm just gonna say it, he is not a big character in this movie, but the middle daughter of this family, which is this father, Chris Messina's character, this high school daughter, and then this little girl. The high school daughter is actually the main character in this movie, and the plot of this movie, it feels like there's a lot of layers to it, but that's honestly just because it focuses so much on these characters and so much on this story, and it's to the detriment where you can't help but notice that this film just felt like it needed to have a story. Like, you just can't help but feel like the film is really cracking under that pressure of feeling like it needs a genuine story, when in actuality it's like, this is just a 90-minute PG-13 Boogeyman movie. I know with saying that, that may not be much of a seller, but that is in actuality what whoever is coming to see this movie is what they're paying to see. And this is one of those movies that has to do a lot with family trauma and, grief and drama, which this does center on a family that is going through these stages of grief and the earlier stages of grief. For example, after the intro and, when we are introduced to these characters, the first scene is actually the middle-aged daughter walking into school, and it's established that she hasn't been there in a long time because of something that happened with her mom, obviously her mom passing away. And, she's this outcast, edgy student. She walks in and puts her earbuds in, and you can see as she's walking through the halls how it's all distorted because of the earbuds tuning out all the noise. All these people are whispering to their friends in the hall, and she's having these run-ins with this very cliche, very cringe high school preppy cheerleader bully who's actually a side character throughout the movie, who's just antagonizing this girl because she's this freak and everything. It's very high school-esque, PG-13 horror film. And I'm just gonna say it, after that intro that was a little bit better, that really was just an intro. Obviously, what I said earlier, especially with horror movies, their intros are really what's going to get people, settled and, supposedly tease people for what the movie is going to, what's going to transpire into the movie. And, there are things that I did think were fine in this movie. Going into a character played by David Dastmalchian, which I didn't know how much of a role he was going to have in this movie. He was obviously in the trailers, and David Dastmalchian is an actor that I really respect. Not with just the roles he plays, but just the performances that he gives. I've always gotten the vibe that the roles that David Dastmalchian picks are very picky. And it's one of those things that, not that he enters the film late, but up to the point where he does enter this film, other than the intro again, this really did just feel like a to the T, everything I would have expected out of a Boogeyman movie. And when he enters the movie, it was just one of those things that he just brought so much depth and so much personality, so much character just right off the bat, where I was just thinking, this guy's going to carry the movie for me 100%, which I do need to state, he is a side character. I'm not going to say how long he's in the movie or what ends up, becoming of his character, but when I saw that he wasn't going to be a huge part of this movie, I was very disappointed. It was one of those things where I was just like, oh great, they got a great actor, he's given a great performance, and then something happened along the way, and I was just like, God damn it. But I do want to note now that I noticed throughout the movie, and this happened very early on, is that the horror in this movie is not paced well at all. It's one of those things where, towards the beginning of the movie, it is very consistent, but it's not anything that really feels necessary. It's not anything that really has a payoff or anything that really feels established. I get some backstory toward certain characters, and you're like, okay, well, what's with that? And then it'll jump to another character that has a completely other story going on that doesn't feel necessary either, that doesn't get touched on enough either. And then you get thrown into like, you know, some eerie music and like following a character down like a dark hall, and you're like, okay, this is obviously, just by looking at it, supposed to be a scare. Let's see what happens. And this is something that felt very odd. I didn't really know how to take it, but in this case, as far as like up to this movie's point, what made these scares not live up to anything or really feel necessary at all is that they happen before anything remotely is addressed. We get the introduction to these characters saying, you know, what's going on with this family, the grief and everything, and then the first time we see them in their actual home, it sets up for a scare, and it's like, wait a minute, what are we, you know, getting here? What are we supposed to, what is this supposed to be building up to? What are we supposed to be, you know, fearing right now? Like, I would go as far as to say that, like, within the first act, not only do we not really see much of the boogeyman, but we don't really hear much of him either. And this happens, you know, many other times as the movie actually, you know, gets going. Like, throughout the movie, there are many times where I was, like, you know, looking to my friend next to me who went and saw the movie with me, and I'm like, so, is this a boogeyman or not? What's with all this character story? What's with all these different side plots? What's with all this lore that doesn't need to be addressed, that isn't going anywhere? And this might be a pretty no shit statement, but obviously the only times that we really hear anything of the boogeyman, that anything has to do with the boogeyman, is during like things where like a clause is referenced or it takes place in someone's bedroom. But the thing here is that these were actually the scenes that came into the movie the least. Where it's like, throughout the movie, as the days are going by, like, where the movie will center on a day and it's getting closer to night, you're like, okay, cool, we're finally gonna get a boogeyman sequence. There will be times where, like, the dad will be, like, putting the daughter to bed, and it'll be nighttime, and someone will be in their room, they'll start hearing bumps, you're like, okay, it's nighttime. We've gotten through an entire day of background, character, drama, of story and filler that we really not only didn't need, but really isn't going anywhere, especially for the sake of a 90-minute boogeyman movie. But again, this just didn't feel like his movie. Remember Halloween Ends last year? How this was supposed to be a big Halloween movie, a big Michael Myers movie? But like, at the end of it, the big joke was just like, yeah, Michael Myers has a cameo in his own movie. That's kind of the situation here. Except instead of just have it being romance throughout the movie, again, like in Halloween Ends.
What was it you were saying about those cherry blossoms?
Didn't go anywhere, didn't need to happen in a Michael Myers finale movie. In this movie, it's just family drama and grief and character backstory that just goes down a million different routes and doesn't go anywhere. And instead of it being, you know, at least Halloween Ends was R-rated, this is in a PG-13 boogeyman movie. And while this is, I guess, a more positive thing that I'm gonna say, it's also a very frustrating factor when you actually think about what it all, you know, like how it all lands in execution and, you know, in hindsight, is that when it would focus on the boogeyman and those scenes would come up, it actually was better than I thought it was gonna be. It goes back to the intro, where there's not much that you can do with a movie that has been done to death like this, but for what it is, and I think it has a lot to do with how Rob Savage directs the movie. And going back to the intro, how I was saying that they, you know, like this take on the boogeyman's character in this movie, those characteristics to him, they actually do touch on a lot, and they actually do very well with, you know, creating that atmosphere from this specific, you know, characteristic. And again, maybe it's just because I didn't know, you know, too much going in. I didn't have too much expectations going into this movie. That was just a surprising trait to me to have for this boogeyman character, and to see how far they went with it when they would actually focus on these scenes. It was fun enough and original enough and surprising enough for what it was. But again, these kind of sequences in these scenes are so far and few in between, and this is only like a 90-something minute movie, that when these scenes do come up, even though they may deliver for, you know, what they are, these are sometimes only like a couple minute long scenes. And at the end of the scenes, while they were fun enough, you know, in the moment, again, in hindsight, when you look back at them, it does feel like it was just enough to tide the viewer over. Like, Rob Savage was just kind of like, okay, we've established this much story, we focused on this much character, this is the boogeyman, let's give them, you know, let's give them their dose of boogeyman for now. And at the end of these scenes, it just kind of feels like we were blueballed as an audience. Like, these scenes come and they happen, and even while they're happening, you're like, okay, and then we jump back to following these characters again in what just feels like a very forced filler setting. And it's not all bad. I always try to give credit to films that want to flesh out characters and want to, you know, spend time with them and try to make you care about them. But again, this just shouldn't have been or felt like the main focus, especially in a 90-minute Boogeyman movie. Also, another thing that made this movie fall apart even more, in my opinion, as it went on, is that this movie incorporates more characters getting toward, you know, the later half of the movie to add more depth, to add more story, in a movie that already doesn't need to have as much depth and as much story as it does, and it just makes this movie just feel that much more cornier and that much more wasted of a, you know, of a movie, at least as far as what we were paying to see in this movie. The movie just takes itself way too seriously, and it also does that thing, especially you know, getting toward this half of the movie, you know, when they're introducing more characters for, you know, greater depth or whatever, it does that thing where it tries to incorporate and, like, touch up on lore and background and history, like, in that classic urban legend sense. But all the stuff that they incorporate in this movie, it has just been done to death. Or when you think about it, the only standout thing in this movie was when it would actually center on the Boogeyman, which is surprising enough considering I didn't even expect for that to pay off whatsoever. And the worst part of that is that is the like least part of the movie. That is the aspect of the movie that gets the least attention in comparison to everything else. Another thing is that the longer this movie went on, it really started to fucking drag. This movie feels like 2 fucking hours or more. And also, when saying that, the longer the movie went on, the more it didn't actually feel like it was divided into separate acts. Like, ironically, the more the movie went on, the more we'd get more, like, side story and filler character development and characters that haven't even been addressed whatsoever in, like, an hour or so are randomly brought back into the movie for just, like, a side scene. And it honestly just made the movie feel like it was just going backwards, like it was just backtracking. And especially in the last act, it really feels like the film just tried way too hard and, again, just cracked under that pressure of overthinking itself because, you know, it is just a Boogeyman movie, that it just needed to cram all this different stuff. And it really just came off very unorganized, very, you know, crammed, and very just messy in the long run. But now that we're actually talking about the ending of the movie, I actually heard from a source earlier on, there was like a lot of different reports saying that at one point in the movie, they actually do give the Boogeyman, like, his scene, like he is the actual spotlight, and they actually bring him out full force, and they do in this movie. And what I will say is that he's actually a pretty cool character, like, to the point where when I saw him, I was like, wow, they actually show the Boogeyman, and he is actually a kind of abomination, damn. But here's the thing, in these reports, it was actually saying that it actually scared audience so much that they actually cut back on the scene, and I'm just like, but that's what people came here for. And I'm just gonna say it. Me saying that this Boogeyman was, you know, it was cool to see this character, that is partially just because it was just finally cool to see this character. And there is a, you know, conclusion, there is a final showdown kind of aspect to this movie, but weirdly enough, it's not really in the horror fashion. It's actually in the action-packed sequence where if Michael Bay had directed a horror movie or had directed this movie, this is kind of how I would have expected it to go down. And yet, in the end, everything in this movie just felt forced. I was exhausted by the end of it, and the things that were actually the better aspect of this movie were 100% the things that were touched up on the least. And overall, guys, I'm feeling a strong negative to very low mixed review for The Boogeyman. But yes, guys, that is going to do it for my review of The Boogeyman. It feels releasing. It feels very relieving to finally talk about this movie after all the mixed and critical thoughts I had of it, especially with this being a weekend that is so jam-packed. There is a lot of movies that I really want to, check out and see. Speaking of the movie Sanctuary, this movie finally released in my city today, so I'm actually, as soon as I'm done with this review, I am going to be going straight to the theater to check out that movie to do a review on that one later tonight. But it just feels so good to get this weight off of my shoulders, man. But yes, guys, that is going to do it for this video. Let me know if you guys did see this movie. I know that there is a lot coming out this weekend. For example, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. I know that that is the biggest movie right now. When I went and saw the Boogeyman, there was like literally 7 showings of that movie playing at the same time, and I'm just like, god damn. Who releases a Boogeyman movie during the Spider-Verse sequel? But yes, guys, for those that did see the movie, definitely let me know your thoughts on it below. I would definitely love to talk with you guys about that. But with all that being said, guys, I'm going to wrap it up. I'm going to get this review out there to you guys, and I'm going to, be checking out Sanctuary tonight, which is a movie I'm very much looking forward to. I will get back to you guys with a review of that movie later on tonight, but as for this video, we're going to wrap it up here. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys are all having a great day. Take care.